Good morning, folks.
Good morning.
Morning.
So welcome to folks who are joining by the recording. We're moving on to the technical or more technical issues from the social ones. The first one being the proposed change to the label for E22 man-made object that came up on the last call. So yeah, George, do you want to describe the state of where we are with this?
Yeah. Sorry, I will describe it quickly because I don't know at what point we will be taking off. I'm in an airplane. But briefly, Rob raised the issue with the SIG. It launched a lively email conversation there were contributions from all sides. Rob proposed that we go directly to made, the formulation of made object or what have you. There was discussion back and forth, and where I could get into the details. But there was some pointing to, well, it's a local issue of English, and other discussions about general control of language in present day period. But I think in the end, people recognize that it's not very inclusive as it's currently formulated, and there was no strong objection to changing it, and no red flags raised. I mean, the only real worrying issue is that because we embed the English name of the class into the actual URI, it means a change of the URI itself going forward. So that's a compatibility issue. But people recognize that it's an issue that has to be addressed, and so it hasn't been voted on yet. But I think the tendency was towards going with human-made, or in all of its on all the various subclasses, and we'll either have an email vote on it shortly or decide it at the next SIG. But it seems like that change will be happening and then can be adopted by Linked Art.
Great. So, which is great news. And thank you to everyone who was on the call last time. It shows that I think as a community we can affect change for the positive in the technical underpinnings. So it's a nice reaction. As George says, it wasn't completely unanimous. There was a few people who didn't want to change it, as George says, mostly because of the effects on the RDF level ontology rather than just changing a name somewhere in a Word document. But there's precedent for that in very recent history of renaming collection to curated holding. So there is certainly a less compelling precedent that we can draw on for that particular complaint. So given that, I think we should probably wait until that vote happens and then update the ontology and context. So that, which, as George says, will be hopefully soon by email, or at worst case in person in June, which is only sort of 6 weeks away anyway. So we can, in the meantime, get ready for changing man-made over to human-made. Any questions or comments on that one?
It was a good example of bottom-up. Worked fine.
Yep. Okay, so on to some of the more technical ones. A while ago we discussed partitioning, and there are a couple of open issues that I think at this point we can just close. So issue 84 is about the use of features, human-made features, or as parts, or human-made objects as parts. And the general consensus was that the cost of using features outweighed the gain, and for most of us, it's mostly impossible to know when to use feature and when to use human-made object. So we should just stick with the simpler case because it solves the problems sufficiently without introducing complexity. So unless there's any strong objections, the proposal then is to close issue 84, which is the main one around that, and then relatedly issue 185, which is to always partition the artwork part of the object out into its own separate bit, that we can not do that because it doesn't solve the 95% case, and that's our target zone. You know, we can't really, again, we normally don't have enough information in our systems to get to this level of very explicit modeling of saying that artwork is a particular oval area within a painted on a particular canvas that has this shape, and the frame is hexagonal, say, or rectangular, and hence where it's good enough just to say that the canvas is made of oil and the support is made of canvas, and the entire thing is oil on canvas. So, are there any strong objections to simply going the simple, easy to explain, but not absolutely 100% semantically accurate?
I have a question, and this is a simpler question. This is about the human-made feature. So are you suggesting then just to use, I'm thinking of the example of, say, petroglyphs or something, where you're talking about petroglyphs on a rock, you know, and that's the sense that I would think of using in the CRM, the expression human-made feature. So we're not saying we can't do that if need be using the model, or are we just going to not use human-made feature at all and just say that that's still a human-made object?
Right. Yes. The use of feature in that particular case for cave drawings as the easy one, where there isn't, where the support essentially is not human-made. It is simply not a subjective. It is a subjectively defined region on the Earth. Yeah, no, I don't think we are talking about that. We are talking about relatively modern, so yeah, not
right.
Objects and the bits of objects, as opposed to
well, the support, it would be a geological.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah.
Or something, and then a human-made feature on that. Right. Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, I don't want to get sidetracked. We can talk about that offline. Okay.
Yep. No, that is definitely the case. So we're not saying we will never use man-made feature at all. Just that we are not going to use it for partitioning of otherwise human-made objects.
Okay. Great. Thanks. Okay.
I guess I have a sort of, let me register a slight worry. Based on experience on a number of other sort of occasions in designing ontologies and so forth, my worry is that any decision to take the easy but not strictly correct route on just about anything will come back and bite you in the ass later, unless there's some easy way provided to sort of slide between the easy but incorrect way and a more correct way. So you can say, I really meant the more correct way of doing it. Does this group's plans have any provision for doing that, i.e. taking a simple description and then under pressure circumstances saying, but it really can be described as the other more complicated way in some perhaps mechanical transition?
Yeah, and I think the way that we would manage that would be to assign appropriate vocabulary types to the parts. So, for example, in issue 84, there's the image of 29 days ago. The book has a part which is the cover, has a part which is the center. Thank you to Vanessa. Versus the book bears a feature, which is the cover, which has a section, which is a place which holds the center, which is again back to being an object. So the transition would be that the cover gets expanded from being a human-made object. I'll train myself to say it correctly. A human-made object to being a feature that has a section of a place that holds the thing. And if there's a has type, classified as relationship on the E22 that is the cover, the human-made object that is the cover, then a migration could go through, or a enrichment process could go through and find all of the things that are tagged as being covers that contain things and map them out to being a feature with a place.
Okay, that sounds elegant, but I think it's going to be important to keep track of those you might call legal enrichment strategies, and because some of them are going to be more plausible than others, or less controversial than others. Anyway, just a side comment, really. Go ahead, guys.
Yep. No, it's a very important comment. So just to clarify a little bit, one of the principles of the design work is that we should keep everything as simple as possible. And it's of course, as possible is always where the monkey lies. That if there isn't data that supports the more complicated version, and there isn't two institutions that have that data, that's sort of our benchmark for when we can, when as possible can be more complicated. And yeah, in these issues, we didn't hear anyone saying that they really had sufficiently good data to handle it. So it would be really adding complexity for the sake of complexity.
No, I understand the methodology, and yeah, that sounds good. I agree.
Mm-hmm. Right, and yeah, this is always still a work in progress. If it turns out later that we have to revisit this decision, then we revisit the decision. Okay, any other questions or comments or similar? Otherwise, we can move on to talking about the highly subjective notion of color. And thanks to George and Richard for coming for the time that they could. All right, so issue 191 is the next one. This came up quite a long time ago. Well, it came up last October, but at the face-to-face meeting here at the Getty a couple months back, it also came up then. So we've pushed it up the stack. The question is how to model color, which is something that I believe many of us have at least some information about. So there is sort of two degrees, two levels of precision. Some systems have white, or red, or green, or ochre as a category, and some that are sort of more computed from digitized images, and the collection records are enriched with that additional automated knowledge, can have much more specific colors, such as maybe it's not absolutely white, it could be RGB, FE. So very, very close to white, and any human would probably say, well, that's white, but a machine can say, no, it's not really white, it's very, 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 very close to white, but not quite. So one way, the it's white route leads us to categorization via classified as. So it's this object is classified as being white, or it's classified as being red. The other way, where there's more explicit information, leads to dimension, where the whiteness is a value. So it would have a dimension which was somehow RGB, and the value would be FE, FE, FE. Well, that turned into a number, seeing as there's dimensions only take numbers. Then, again, to Pat's good point, if there are two different ways, and one is the simpler route and one is the more precise route, but we don't always have the information for the more precise route, is there a good way that we can go from one to the other in a way where there's essentially one model, not two, just that it might be slightly more verbose for the for that one model. There is another.
Are there specific use cases where using it as a dimension would be useful?
I think it's when you want to have a color palette auto built. So if you had a AAAF image and someone ran a processor over it that pulled out the 5 most prominent colors, and then you pull those colors back into the description, yeah, there may not be a particular name or type for that particular hex, but that's where I have heard the value of the dimension as. But what do people think? Who else has color in their systems, and do you have it as a sort of categorical drop-down list that you can select from, or is it more machine generated with hex numbers?
We don't use it, but I can imagine there being a great divergence of approaches for handling this. And so recording it as a dimension might lead to some either inconsistencies or insufficiencies in the model, depending on the kind of analysis that would be done to determine the color or colors of the object. And it's maybe not even necessarily about the object as it is about the imagery taken of the object, because under different lighting conditions, it's going to be a different color.
Yep. And Dan, you said in chat that you use hex codes. Is that because you have the sort of precise measured colors, or how do you get to the hex codes?
Yeah, we derive those, Rob, from RGB values and choose whatever's nearest.
But it seems to me here there are two threads, right? There's one that talks about the technical metadata around colors, and that might be something that is coming from the digital studio. And then there's the other thread, which is more on the descriptive metadata side, where catalogers might note the prominent color of an abstract painting and say, that's red. And in our case, at least, they will try and find those colors in the AAT. But so, yeah, we, as much as possible, will try and link back to the AAT for color names. But that's not a scientific description or of the image, right? It's more of an iconographic description.
Adam, you have information in the digitization, but not in the
Yeah, just that tends to be much more technical information in terms of, you know, it might start with color bars in in an image or something like that next to the resource. What exactly happens to it is I actually don't know that very well. We have multiple units that do nothing but digitization here, some in mass, some, you know, in how do I put it, in kind of more careful ways, in the sense that, you know, one-off kinds of digitizations. All of them produce some kind of color metadata, pretty much. Where it goes and, you know, how accessible it is a little hard to say, just because it varies. It is not, by and large, going to end up in the same kinds of TMS-like CISs from which we're deriving most of the kinds of metadata that are of interest here. So I'm basically saying, like, I know that data is out there in the Smithsonian somewhere, but how easy it would be to aggregate back to the records that we're starting with is an open question. For me, how worth it would be to pursue that depends on sort of the opposite, or the dual, of the question you asked at the beginning of this conversation, Rob. You asked about what people have and what people are doing with the information they have recorded. I tend to think about this more in terms of what would we like to be able to do, what would be useful to show people, for people to present as behavior, you know, for their resources. And I don't have any answers at all for that. So, but, you know, that's what determines for me just how worth it is to go to many different units that might have this information and try to get it out into some form that we can put into Linked.art use cases, basically. And I'm guessing they must be out there. I mean, color does seem to be kind of important as far as art goes. It's kind of connected in some way or another. But, you know, exactly how we might use it, or how we might, you know, provide people with its use is, I don't think we talked about that yet. It would seem a little early.
Yeah, that is a great point. How do people use color information currently, and how, if there was a aggregate collection across all of our collections, how would we want to use color in a way that would be good for research or our daily business?
Well, I can just throw in that, you know, I have been using we have been using either just art and architecture, using a URI for a color, which, you know, I am curious and interested in. There are different ways. I think Pat asked, is there a Pantone vocabulary that of terms that could be used to get a little more precision? But you know, it is possible in our system to just say, you know, red and any and then anything that any image that has a color red is then linked to whatever that is. Like, it has a caboose that's red, or it has you know, the image has you know, a dress that's red, and you can, you know, just so you can search on red as a URI and then semantically find anything that might have that color in it. So it's a nice demonstration of what you can do if you have a URI for the color. But, you know, I do agree that with everything that the person who was just speaking before me said about Adam, about what else could we say, what else could we do with color is interesting, you know, or how much more precise could we get would be interesting.
I guess I'm a little bit worried about the precision, because if one is looking for red, but if it's described as crimson or scarlet, how does that link back to red?
Question: is there a provision for that in art and architecture? So I don't know about that right now. If crimson links to red, like if it's a shade, you know, is there any kind of subclassing or anything in AAT? I haven't noticed that, but I haven't looked for that either.
Yeah, there's certainly the hierarchy, but Yeah, where the
Yes,
crimson is
crimson is under red. It's
Ah.
under variable red colors, which is under red.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
Then
So
in my system, we should be able to search for crimson and have it come up with red, so, or vice versa.
I mean, there are some psychological issues here. The boundaries of things like red and blue and so forth are not well defined. I mean, they are not precisely located in the color space. The kind of centers of them are. Everybody recognizes the red, the main red, but post office red in the UK, fire engine red in the US. But where does red go to brown? You know, and no, people just don't agree. There's a lot of psychological data on this. And it can vary with lighting, it can vary with mood. So I think trying to get too much precision here might be a tactical error. Yeah, just an observation.
Yep, that is a good point too. So in the notes document, I'm jumping ahead slightly because I'm noting the time. I put in some JSON-LD. That could be one way to get both into a single model. So if we treat color as a dimension, but where the value and unit are optional if you don't have them, then that dimension is a color and the dimension is white. So we could simply use the classified as P2 has type of saying it's the white, it's the color white. And you know, if we don't know that it's exactly FE, then we just don't say that. If we do know it, then we can put it in. If we don't want to make a judgment call that is white, it could be, I have no idea what FE is in somewhere else, then you wouldn't classify it as white. But at least there's a single structure that we can then build for color with both of the possibilities, the exact and the categorical.
Is there any notion of what proportion of the object has that color?
That is a question for curators, I think, of which we have some. Would anyone like to comment on that? How do people catalogue their colours in terms of the proportion of the colour of the object? No, maybe we don't have anyone particularly on the call. I don't.
My guess would be you know, either with the word "and" or predominantly white with violet highlights, or you know, something like that.
How about the word "but"?
Yeah, I think we can probably be silent about exactly how much of a color needs to be present before it can be said to be a particular color. And then if the information being represented isn't useful, then people won't use it. And if it is, then but
I was recently buying paint, you know, house paint, and I noticed that in the huge colored displays they have on the in Home Depot, there's an entire section called whites, which is a plural.
Yep.
There's about 30 different whites.
Yeah, I imagine, like there is variable red color, I imagine there's also whitish colors in AAT. Let's see. I don't see them. Olive colors. There are lots of different olives, apparently.
But I think, I mean, sorry, my point of observation was that they're all called white. I mean, it's perfectly okay to say that something is a bluish white or a pinkish white, but it's still a white.
Yep.
And which suggests that one can have a sort of a broad category for these colors, which have instances which are the precise categories, or subclasses, perhaps would be a better way of putting it, which might be a good approach to putting them into a technical vocabulary. I'm sure other people have had the same thought.
Yeah, the top of the AAT hierarchy for color, I'll put into the chat, splits up into chromatic, achromatic, perceived, different color systems, and so on. So this is something that we have quite a lot of vocabulary around, for sure. Well, it is the top of the hour. Does anyone, any initial reactions, and I'll put this into the issue, any initial reactions to that approach that I put into the notes document as a way forwards? It keeps the categorization possible, but only has, if that's all we're doing, it's slightly more complicated, but it does allow the more precise computed form.
So the only thing that perhaps is missing on here is RGB. Is an RGB value sufficient to describe a color without having a color profile?
Yep.
But in general, I think this is it's a nice blended approach that lets you do either. I mean, it might add, I mean, treating color as a dimension is the worst it might do is add a little bit of verbosity to the data, but it's fine.
Yep, I think we by going with linked data, we have brought into verbosity, or we have we've made that bid. All right. Well, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, to me, it's a bit difficult because it could, I mean, it puts one approach clearly on top of the other. So if we really want to leave the door open to both, then it's maybe not so, it doesn't look so open because it gives the feeling that one would need the RGB value before doing any classification.
Yep.
And in a linked data approach, there could be some issues later down the stream. If an institution categorizes an RGB value with one color dimension, color concept, and another one would classify the same RGB value with another color concept, maybe a finer grained one.
Yep. I think that would be representative of what people said about the perception of color.
Very much fitting the diversity of the field, but maybe tricky to handle technically.
Yes, indeed. All right, so let's continue this in the issue. Some of us certainly have to run to a different call, which I need to be chairing, unfortunately. So thank you to John for taking the notes at somewhat strong-armed into it. So doubly thank you there. Thank you everyone for coming and for the great discussion. We'll talk again in a couple of weeks' time.